I remember that night as if the prairie itself branded it into my memory. The wind howled across the open land, carrying with it a sharp, bitter cold that crept through every crack in my lonely cabin. Winter on the frontier was cruel, but that night felt different, almost foreboding. I had gone out to check on my horses, their breaths rising in pale clouds against the dark sky, when I saw them three shapes crumpled near the edge of the creek, half buried in the snow. At first, I thought the cold and the moonlight were playing tricks on my eyes. But when I drew closer, my lantern-esque glow revealed what I could scarcely believe: three young Apache, unconscious, their skin pale beneath the frost, their bodies trembling though they were nearly frozen stiff. My heart stopped. I knew well the dangers of this land, how ranchers and Apache rarely crossed paths without bloodshed. My neighbors would ve told me to leave them there, to let the cold take them. But I couldn't. Not with death breathing so close. Not with their faces looking more like children than enemies. I dropped to my knees in the snow, my hands shaking as I touched their icy skin. Their lips were blue, their breaths faint. I whispered to myself, "God help me," and then I began dragging them, one by one, across the frozen ground, back toward the light of my lonely cabin. Inside, I stoked the fire until it roared, the flames licking high, filling the single room with warmth and the scent of burning pine. I wrapped each of them in wool blankets, rubbing their arms, their hands, willing life back into their bodies. I brewed broth and set it near their lips, though they were too far gone to sip. All the while, fear gnawed at me, fear of what I'd done, of who they were, of what might happen come morning. Hours passed before the eldest stirred. A boy, perhaps no older than 17, his dark eyes fluttering open to meet mine. The moment his gaze locked on me, I saw fire and fear all at once. He tried to push himself up, his lips trembling with words I couldn't understand. I pressed a hand gently against his shoulder. "Rest," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he knew the word. "You're safe here." He looked at me, suspicious, guarded, but then his gaze shifted to his sisters or perhaps cousins, I couldn't know for sure, still unconscious beside him. Something softened in his eyes then, and he let his head fall back against the pillow. For days, I tended to them. I gave them broth spoon by spoon, held warm cloths against their skin, prayed over them when I thought they might not wake. Slowly, their strength returned. The youngest girl, no more than 12, smiled at me one morning with shy gratitude, and my heart cracked wide open. Yet with every small victory, I felt the weight of danger pressing in. If word spread that I had Apache under my roof, the neighbors might ride out with rifles, and still, when I looked into their eyes, I saw not enemies but souls lost, cold, and alone in a world that had turned cruel. The boy, once strong enough to sit, began to watch me closely. He never said much, but I felt his unspoken questions. Why had I saved them? Why would I risk myself for three strangers? I wondered the same. Perhaps because I knew loneliness too well. My husband had been gone for 3 winters now, buried on the hill where the prairie grass grew wild. Since then, my cabin had been nothing but echoes and silence. Saving those children gave me purpose again, something worth protecting. One night, as the snow piled against the windows and the fire burned low, the boy finally spoke in broken English. His voice was rough, halting, but clear enough to understand. "You, help us." "Why?" I looked at him across the dim glow, my hands folded tight in my lap. "Because no one deserves to die cold and alone. Not out here. Not anywhere." He stared at me for a long time, then gave the slightest nod. It was a fragile bridge, but it was a bridge nonetheless. The days turned to weeks. As they healed, the boy whose name I learned was Tahomo began to help me with chores. He hauled water from the well, chopped wood for the fire, even mended a broken hinge on the barn door. The younger girls gathered eggs from my hens, their laughter filling the cabin with a music I hadn't heard in years. For the first time since my husband's passing, my home no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive. But I knew it could not last forever. The world outside my little cabin had no patience for peace. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, riders appeared on the ridge, neighbors who had seen too much smoke rising from my chimney, who wondered what secrets I kept. I felt the fear clutch at me, but before I could speak, Tahomo stepped forward, his jaw set, his eyes burning with resolve. He would face them, defended me if need be, though he was still thin from hunger and sickness. That courage, it shook me. I went out to meet the riders myself. My voice did not tremble when I told them the truth, that I had found 3 souls freezing in the snow, that I had done what any God-fearing woman should do. Their eyes narrowed, their whispers carried on the wind, but in the end, they turned their horses and rode away. Relief flooded me, though I knew whispers would spread. Still, in that moment, something changed between me and Tahomo. He looked at me not just with suspicion, nor just with gratitude, but with a quiet respect. Perhaps even something deeper, though words were never spoken. When spring finally thawed the land, it was time for them to leave. Their people waited for them somewhere beyond the horizon. We stood together in the doorway of my cabin, the prairie stretching wide and endless before us. The youngest girl hugged me tight, her small arms fierce around my waist. Tahomo lingered, his dark eyes searching mine. "You save us," he said softly. "We remember." I touched his arm, my voice low. "And I will remember you." They walked into the morning light, their figures growing smaller until they disappeared into the prairie grass. My cabin grew quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. The walls still held their laughter, the fire still held their warmth, and my heart lonely no longer held the memory of what it meant to care, to risk, to love without reason. The frontier has a way of testing a soul, of stripping life down to its rawest edge. That winter, I learned that sometimes salvation doesn't come from being saved but from saving someone else.